So, have you finished making your logo? From the previous part, we can start with this part where we will focus in depth on making really good materials in Blender, and that we are gonna do by making a really nice background for our logo. For the background, we are going to use the mesh plane, and then you know what to do. You have to rotate it by pressing the R and the X key, and let's rotate it by 90 degree, which is 90, and enter. Now this is very close to the logo. I would like to move it back, so press G to move it and Y to move it on the Y-axis. That much should be good enough, and we have to center it at the logo, so move it a little bit up. Now this background is not covering the whole camera view, so we can scale it by pressing the S key, and let's scale it up. Click on this render region. Only things through the camera will be visible. Great. Now we can create a really nice material on our background. So select the plane. Let's rename this by pressing F2 and name this as BG and enter. Now head to the materials tab. Here we'll click this new to create a new material, and I'll name this one to background. Okay, we have all these settings that we can use to change and play around with the material of the plane, but we are going to go more in depth. These materials have more control, but they cannot be accessed from this property panel. So if we go to this icon and click on this, which gives us this really huge drop down menu where we can click and select this shader editor. We are here where there are two boxes. If you look closely, the first box, which says Principal BSDF, it has all the same properties that is available here in the properties panel. And then this Principal BSDF is connected to the surface of this material output. So basically this green looking node is a shader. And what is a shader? Basically it defines how your logo will look like, its color, its metallicness, its roughness, and also if it can be transparent and fully opaque. And there's a lot of things. There's not just one shader, there are tons of shader that gives you different result. So they all will have this green color look, and they all will have this BSDF output. But for this tutorial, we are going to work with this Principal BSDF. So to connect this to this surface, we can just drag it out like a noodle and connect this to the surface. This is by default what we were getting. And this material output will show the result inside the 3D viewport or through the camera, which is on the surface of that particular object, which is if we change the color, that surface will also change the color and become metallic and reduces roughness and so on. Now, what are these dots that is connected to this base color, metallic and roughness? We'll understand these more by using more nodes inside Blender. So you can add even more nodes, just how you add a mesh into the scene by pressing Shift A. You can add and get this menu right here. So there are majorly 5 types of nodes inside this. The color, which will have all the color, which will give us this color output, which has the same input right here. Then we have the converters, which will look like blue. These are good for changing and playing around with the result. Next is the shader that you already know. And after that we have textures. By default we have tons of texture like a brick texture, a checker texture, and so on. They will all look like this brown in color. And lastly we have these vector inputs, which will look like blue in color. So these are the different types and colors of nodes. But we don't have to go through all of them. What we want to create is these shiny straight lines. And we are going to do that using a noise texture. To add a texture, we will press Shift A. Go to the texture section where we have tons of textures. What we are going to use is this noise textures, and if we click it, we can get this node, which we can move around, and if we left click, we can just place it right there. Now this noise texture has 2 output. First one being the factor, which is a float value. What is a float value? Float value consists of 0 and 1. That can be black and white. To understand more, we will connect this factor to this base color right here. And you can see the background, it looks like a cloudy background. But if we connect this color to this base color, this will give us colorful noise in the background. And this noise texture has a lot of settings. Like we can increase the scale, the noise has become more dense. We can play around with the details, we can play around with the roughness, how small and how big the noise you want it to be, and more settings that we are not going to use. What we want to use is the scale. So we are going to increase the scale to 100 for now. And we have tons of noise, but these are not straight line. To get them into a straight line, we are going to utilize this vector input. So what we are going to plug into this vector is a new node. If we press Shift A and search for texture coordinate, we get this node and we can left click here. Now if we connect this generated to the vector, nothing happened because by default this vector is already utilizing the generator. So let's understand what is texture coordinate. So whenever you see an object in Blender, for example a cube, if Blender want to apply a particular shader on that cube, what Blender will do is make that 3D object into a flat image by unfolding it, just like this. Then Blender can just apply simple texture on it using just a 2D image. That's how the texture coordinates work. And we can control this texture coordinate if we use a mapping node in between. So press Shift A and search for mapping and drag it in between. With this mapping, we get a lot of options. We can change the location, rotation, and scale. So if we change the location, you can see it moving on the x-axis. So I'm pressing Shift and left mouse button to drag it left and right. So it moves slowly. We can do the same for the y direction. We can rotate it on the x. Rotation on the x will not work properly, but rotation on y will be visible and rotation on z is also visible. Let's just reset all this value by pressing Ctrl Z. And lastly, you have the scale as well. You can increase the scale. So as you can see, if you increase the value, you can see that they are getting condensed. Same, you can do it in the y direction as well. You can use this same thing to get our desired result. So set this y value to 200. So it will condense it all in the x direction. Nothing is visible right now. If we reduce the y value, it's gonna stretch it in the y direction. But the problem is that we are utilizing this inside the base color, and we don't want to control the base color with this. We want to control the roughness because we want to create those shiny lines. So we connect this to the roughness instead, and also make our object all the way metallic and changing it to 1. Now those lines are visible better, but we will change the base color also. Drag this down to somewhat like that, and that is good. Now I have set it the noise texture scale very high. I'm gonna change it back to the default value. So set it to default value, and our lines are more visible, better than before. That's the result we were looking for. We don't have that much control over this roughness of these lines. So some are totally black and some are white. As you saw the noise texture, the black noise will be shiny and the white one, it will not be shiny. That is visible here. These are too much black. So just after the noise texture, we are going to use a color ramp. So search for color ramp, like in between. Now if we select this marker, this is black. If we click this and click on this bar here, we can change the color as per our requirement. So I'm going to set this one to a little bit darker gray, and then I'll select this marker which is white, and I'll click on this and I'll set it a little bit lighter gray so that we get this kind of result. And now I'm going to move them in a bit. Now we can make our result 10 times better, and that we are going to do is by using this normal input. So with this normal, we can create fake depth in our object, which will not physically be there. To make that happen, we can connect this noise texture to this normal, but that is not going to work because this factor needs to be converted into a normal output. To convert it into a normal value, we use a node which is bump. So search for bump and just drag it here. Connect this vector to the height, and then we can connect this normal to the normal. And then you can see those lines are looking 10 times better. Now, what if you want to rotate these lines into a particular direction? You can do that too. Not with this mapping because it's not useful anymore. It won't rotate them. Select this texture coordinate, drag it out to create some space. Then we add another mapping node in between and then connect here. Now we can rotate it with the Z value here. So if you rotate this value, you can see the lines rotating as well. I will set the Z value to 45 and enter, and now the lines have rotated. And look how cool the background is. So that was the simple and the most basic texture we can create using all these nodes. If you have any doubts regarding anything, please do let me know in the comment section and I will clear your doubts as soon as possible. Now that we have a really nice logo and a really nice background, it's time we learn the magic part of the Blender. There are a lot of ways for doing that, but we are going to use geometry nodes for this one. This is gonna be like a little walk in the park. So just like how we add texture on our logo, we'll select our logo. Instead of the materials tab, we will head to the modifiers tab. Here we can add a modifier, and that is going to be the geometry nodes that is available on the top. Now, nothing has happened. So there are a lot of default layouts available on the top. You need to select the geometry nodes one. That will switch everything to this. Okay, right now we have not created a new geometry node. Just how we create a new material, we can create a new geometry node by clicking this new, or we can click on this new right here as well. This panel right here is geometry node editor. Let's click on new, and we have two nodes. These will be different from the one in the materials because this mainly consists of a geometry pipeline. So what is a geometry? If you see on the top left corner, this is a spreadsheet. This shows us what that particular geometry is consist of. So this particular object is a mesh which consists of vertices, edges, faces, and face corner, and it tells us how many of them are there in that logo. So basically, this group input is our original object, and this output lets us see what is the final result. And in between, we can do all the magic we want. So for example, you can add nodes just like how you add in materials. So press Shift A, and then there are a lot of nodes here, more than what we had in the materials. So if we search for a node, a specific node which is set position, which is geometry right type, if we use this and plug it in between, this can be used for a simple operation. So if we try to change the X value, our object will start moving on the X direction, and if you move it on the Y, it will move on the Y direction. You will notice that the Y direction it is moving on is actually the Z direction, which is visible on the top right gizmo. And if you move it on the Z, it's moving actually on the Y axis. Why is that happening? If we select our logo and press the N key in the viewport, this will pop up, which shows the transformation applied to our logo. And the problem is that there's already a rotation of 90 degrees that we applied at the start of our video. Since we rotated that plane, which was lying flat on the floor, and made a 90-degree rotation, that is affecting the position here. To fix that, we'll select our logo, press Ctrl A, and this will bring us the apply transformation panel. So we are facing a problem with the rotation, so we will apply the rotation. So click on rotation, and as you can see that X value has become 0, and still our logo's rotation is still the same. So let's see if that has fixed our logo. So let's hide this by pressing N again. Back into the geometry nodes. Now if we move it on the Z axis, it's moving in the correct direction. Right now we have to do three things. First, we need to decide start point for our effect. So to decide that, we can add an empty. If you press Shift A, you will get the option to select the empty, then that is plane axis, and by default it will be added on the wall origin. It doesn't matter if it's big or small, I can just place it like that. Now geometry nodes is gone because you will have to select the logo again, and then geometry nodes is back. If you don't want it to keep on disappearing, you can click on the spin icon After that, you can select whatever object you want and it will stay just like that. Now I will name this empty as start point. We can bring this start point inside the geometry nodes. So you can go to the outliner, hold and drag that inside the geometry node, and it is inside as an object info, where we have selected that start point as an object. Now Blender doesn't know what it has to do with this. So what we will do in Blender, use its location so we can get the distance using a vector math node. Shift A and search for vector math node and connect this location to the first socket. And I'm going to change this one to the distance. Now we need the location of our original object. We can get that using a simple node. So search for a position node. This will give us the location of our object and all its vertices, faces, etc. Connect this to the second one. Now this gives us this gray output, which is a float value, which is black and white. So to visualize it, what we can do is Control Shift left click on this group input, which will give us this viewer. Now with this viewer, we can visualize any data. So if we connect this value to this value here, you can see something like this. Right now, why is it all white? The reason behind that is we made changes to the scale of our object. As you can see, it has a scale of this. We need to apply the scale so that it becomes all one. So select your logo, press Ctrl A and then apply scale. And that has become black at the bottom and white at the top, thus giving us the distance between the start point and our logo. And that scale has all become one as well. Now you are thinking, what is the use of that black and what is the use of that white data? So if you plug this inside the offset, and we can turn off temporarily our viewer with this icon. As you can see, the black part won't move and the white part has moved a lot, but in a weird direction. Don't worry, we will fix that. We can move this black and white part using a simple node, which we will search and we'll add a math node. This is just a math node, not a vector math node. If we connect the value output and connect the value back into the offset, also make sure to connect it to the viewer as well so that we can see what is happening. Now if we change the value, you can see we can move that black and white part so that we can animate that effect. This will be really helpful. Let's just arrange it properly. Now if we turn off our viewer, we'll get a weird result like this. This is happening because our value has gone to minus, and if it goes to minus, it will give us a really bad result. To fix this, we will use a node which is called map range, and we can drag it in between the viewer and the set position. So what this will help us with is it will keep the two minimum value to 0. So which means even if our add math node goes beyond the 0, which is below the 0 to minus, it will not affect the logo and it will keep that original position, thus fixing our problem. Also, I will just change this linear to smoother step. That will give us a really smoother result compared to the linear. Now this is not the result that we are looking for, right? Our logo should be going out in all the direction, left, right, front, bottom, and that can be done using normal data. For temporary reason, I will just turn off this geometry modifier. If you go to the modifier section and click on this display icon, that will just temporarily turn it off. Select our logo, press the tab key to go into the edit mode. Then here we get this icon which is mesh edit mode. Here inside this we get a normal section and click on this face normal. This is the normal direction of that particular face. It is always at a 90 degree of that particular face. We'll use this data to make the face go towards that direction for each of the faces. So let's go out of the edit mode, get back to geometry nodes. We'll make some more space, move all this to the left, duplicate this distance node which is a vector math node, and I'll switch the function to multiply and drag it in between and connect to both the socket. Let's turn on our geometry nodes again. Turn off the viewer. We can get a normal data inside geometry net as well. So Shift A and search for normal. We can plug the normal to the second socket, and now we are seeing this really bizarre result. Our mesh has become something like a floating balloon. If we change the value which is used for animating, this is not looking good. The reason is that we have to split all these edges so that these faces can individually move in every direction. To fix that, just before the set position, we can add a split edges. It will split the edges and thus giving us this better and clearer result. Also, to make our result look better, we'll change the faces from quads to triangle. So just before the group input, we'll search for a node which is called triangulate. It is operation and we can drag it in between before the split edges. And it will make all the faces into triangles. Now here you will notice is that the left one is having proper effect. But for the right one, the right wing, the faces are going inside and it is looking very chaotic. Let me tell you the reason for that. If we switch back to edit mode, let's scale down the size of these normals. So as you can see, the normal of these faces are perfect. But for the normals of these, they are not in proper direction. If we go inside the mesh, they are inwards. The reason behind is that we duplicated this object, scaled it in a -1 direction, which flipped the normals. To fix that, what we can do is select all the faces, press Shift N, and that will recalculate the normals, giving us this drop down, and that has fixed the normals for the right wing. And these are now outwards. Now we can exit the edit mode and let's animate with this add value and see if that has fixed. Yes, as you can see, the right wing is performing as the left wing. Now our next issue is that once we have made our logo visible, that is okay. But if we want to start the animation, at a particular point, the logo is not disappearing and it is just standing there like that, and that will not look good inside the camera. We can make this disappear by using a simple node which is called delete geometry. As the name sounds, it will delete geometry for us, but it has deleted everything. Blender doesn't know what we want, but it has given us a selection of what we want to delete. And what will help us is the data that we created, this distance data, and connect the map range directly to the selection here. So our logo is back, and if we try to animate it now, the effect seems to be a bit weird. It has deleted the part where the effect was. To fix that, we can adjust the value of this delete geometry. So if we duplicate this add node, and instead of connecting to the selection, we will connect this to the add and connect this back to the selection. And here, as you can see, our result is different than before. So let's try changing the add value. Now if we change around this value, you can see the mesh appearing and disappearing. So we can take in additional faces that we want on our object, which has the effects part, and a -0.5 value will be perfect for it. And now if we look through the camera and try to animate it, it is looking perfect. Now let's go back to the layout where we created our original logo. Now we don't have the controls here, of course. We have to switch to the geometry node editor, and only here we can control with this. Now if we don't want to go back every time inside the geometry node, what we can do is this group input has a socket where we can connect any type of socket. So we can connect this value which is used to animate to this, and we will get that particular value out here, and we can directly animate it from here. And with this node setup, we have created a really nice effect for us. Now let's move towards the next step, which is lighting and compositing. Let's start with the lighting. So we can make our scene more better with more lights. So press Shift A and we are going to add the light, which is area light once more, and we'll move this up. Let's learn a bit more about the properties of the light. So to see better, I'll add a plane to the scene on the ground so that we can see more properly. Now if I select this light and then go to the properties, here we have a lot of things. First of all, you can switch between the point, sun, spot and area light that we were able to add from here. Next, you can change the temperature. If you want to make it look more warm, you can switch this to the left side and the light will be more warmer light. As you can see, it has become red. That is too much. If you shift towards the right, the light will become more cooler and you can see a little blue tint. So let's not change with that. and we don't want to use temperature. Next, you can change the color of the light if whatever you would prefer we are not able to see properly. So let's zoom in a bit and also increase the power to around 100 so that we can see its effect. Now that is a blue light, we can change the color around like that. Is the exposure, you can reduce the exposure and increase the exposure. After that, you can change the shape of your light. If you see on the right panel, if you change it to rectangle, to a disc, to an ellipse. You can also change the size of your light from here and from the scene as well by pressing the S key, and you can scale it, and you can do that on any direction. Next, the most important thing is the spread. If you reduce down this value and take it way less, around 0, you can see there's a very sharp square on the ground because our light is very harsh right now. If we try to increase the number, the light will become softer and more softer. And at a point, it will just be totally soft light, which has a lot of spread. Now that we know about these settings, let's get rid of this plane and select our light again. I will move it down instead. Reset its color by right clicking, reset it to default. Now what I want to do is rotate it towards the logo. So press R and the X key and rotate it by 180 degree by typing the 180 and enter. Now if I change the spread of the light to around 45, the light will become sharper and we can see this building part glowing up a little bit. It's not that great, but we can make it better. So that will bring in the compositing. We can switch this to a compositor. By default, you won't have this. If you click this use nodes, then you might be able to see this. Now we want to make it look more shiny and glowy. For that, we have a really nice node we can drop in between. Press Shift A and we'll search for glare, and then we can drop it in between. But it is not working. There are two ways to see your result. First is by going to render image, and that is a long process. The shorter way is that if we click on this drop down, it shows us this setting which says compositor, and we can check this to always. And now you can see that really nice glow on that logo and the edges. I'm going to change this one to bloom, and that looks 10 times better. Consider compositing like you are doing changes using a Photoshop on an image. For example, you can do more stuff. So press Shift A, and if you go to the filter, and then here we can search for a node which is called Kuwahara. Tap it like that, and that will make it a bit more stylized. If you increase the size, you can see that texture paint look on the logo. So there are a lot of things that are available inside this. You can try all those out, but we are going to stick with this. This makes our logo look more cool. Next, let's adjust other lights. So I will go to the left view and I'm going to change this rotation of this light. So we can reset the rotation. If you press the N key, we can see the rotation, and I can click and drag on all these three, and then it will let me enter a value. Whatever value I enter, like 0, that will enter the value for each of them like that. And let's press the N to close it. Now I will rotate it by a perfect 90 degree and place it somewhere like here behind the camera. Of course, the power is too much, so I've set the power to 1. We cannot see our background right now, but don't worry about it. We're going to add some more lights. So press Shift A and then add another light which is a point light, and our background is back. Before we make changes to this point light, let's select the logo, and I want it to fully appear. So go to the modifier section and then change the value so that it can appear fully. Now we can adjust with this point light. I will move it around somewhere here. This point light will have same properties with a radius that if we increase, it will make the light softer, and if it's less, it will make the light harsher. So I will keep the radius of the light to around 0.08. You can use the same value and the power will remain the same. The look that I'm looking for is if I press the console key and go to the front view, you can see that really nice line going on the background. I want to follow the same and place these point light same way. So I'll select this point light, press Shift D to duplicate it, and I will place one here and duplicate it, and I will place one here like that. And look at that, it is following that line on the background and it looks really nice. Of course, you can tweak around and change around with the result as you like to get a desired result that you like. Now another issue is that if I select the logo and go to the modifiers and play with the animation, you can see it is glowing way too much, and that is due to the reason that this light is very powerful. So go to the data properties of that light, and 100 is way too powerful for that. So I'm going to reduce it to 5, and that is a proper glow on these triangular shapes, and it looks really awesome. And now if we try to animate with the value from the modifier section, it is looking way cooler. I think with this you have learned to set up the lights in your scene. You have to just use the creative side to set up the scene really perfectly. Now it's time you will learn to animate the whole scene. Start with the effect. So let's selecting the logo. We already have the value, but how do we animate it? It's really simple. When you are hovering over this value, you just press the I key on your keyboard and it will insert a keyframe. You can see that dot appear. It will change to a yellow color. And the same will be visible on this timeline. At the frame number 1, as it was already on frame 1, it has inserted a keyframe. So for example, if I go to the 180 frame, and again if I press I, it will insert a keyframe. Now why this long line? This tells us that there is no change in the value minus 0.587 here, and it is the same value here. So for example, we want our logo to be disappeared at the start. So let's just change the value and make it disappear somewhere around like that, and insert a keyframe again. If you don't insert the keyframe, you can see it is orange. Once you insert a keyframe, it means you have inserted a keyframe and yellow colors appear. Now the line has gone because this keyframe value and this keyframe value are different. And if I try and hit that spacebar, you can see the animation working on its own. My bad, I haven't completely animated the logo here, so let's just bring it back totally. Somewhat like that, and insert a keyframe. Now this way we can keyframe a lot of things. If I want to create a nice effect, if I select all these light by pressing shift and left clicking, if I move this light on the Z direction, you can see that glare moving on the logo, and that looks really nice. So we can create an animation based on that. So first of all, I will go to the 80th frame, this light, and then press I in just the viewport. It will insert a keyframe. That will automatically apply keyframe on all the things, that is location, rotation, and the scale. That is also visible when you press the N key. But if we do that, we have to do manually for each one of them. I don't want to do that. Instead, there's a better way. So select this light, shift and hold, select this light, and lastly select the center light. So we are going to parent these two to this one. Whatever is selected at the last will become the parent. To parent them, press Ctrl P, and this will give you this option. And you can just select object. This light is the parent and the other two are the children's. If you move the parent, the children will follow. So we have to create some animation like this. So let's just keyframe here by selecting the light and press I to insert a keyframe. Go to the 180th frame and again insert keyframe. So we want the light to be positioned here at the 180th frame, but at this frame we can move the light a bit up on the 80th frame, somewhat like that. Insert a keyframe. And now if you try to play the animation, you can see a little movement on those glares. You can change around with the result for whatever result you are expecting. Change around the position of keyframe to get different result. You can move the keyframe, of course. You can duplicate the keyframe as well, and that will make things convenient for you. There's also a button. If you click this button right here, which is auto keying, if I click on this and if I go to the 0 frame, and even if I move my object anywhere in the scene, it will automatically apply a keyframe. That will only work if there was already a keyframe applied to this particular object. But I don't use it all the time. It is only necessary when needed. That is something, the type of result that I am looking for. Next step is where I don't want any light in the background at the beginning of the animation, which is at the first frame till the 50th frame. So we can do that, of course, by selecting each and every light, then going to their properties and keyframing the power. But that is a very long procedure, as we have to select every light and keyframe each one of them. That will be time consuming. Instead, there is a little nice trick. We'll add another light to the scene that is going to be the area light. Move it towards the background, place it somewhere like this, move it up, and I will scale it up a lot. like that. Now, what if instead of keeping it a positive value, we change it to -10? What will happen? You can see it's eating away the light a little. To see the result better, you can uncheck the normalize. It will work more better. Then I will change the exposure to 2 so that it works even better. Now let's just keyframe it properly. So at the first frame, I will keyframe on the power to keep it just like that, and at the 50th frame, I will change the power to 0, enter, and insert a keyframe by pressing the I. We won't be able to see the animation right now because it takes time to compute that light effect, so you will be able to see that nice result in your final render. Of course, to make this even at the very start, what we can do is go to the front view. We can duplicate it by Shift T, moving on the Z-axis. I'll just rotate it by 180 degree by holding the control to snap it. It is even, but let's just move it a little bit down. Why we duplicated it right now, not before that? Because whatever keyframe we applied on this has already been copied over to the duplicate. So our animation on the logo looks quite dull. Let's make it more spicy. So what we can do is go to the first frame here. As you want to animate it and rotate it like that, we won't be able to see the logo. We can turn off the effects if we go to the modifiers and click on this display button. It will temporarily turn off the effect. Now we can animate it properly. So first, at the first frame, let's just give it a little bit of rotation by pressing the R and the Z key. And I'll give it somewhat like -25 or 30 would do. And then make sure to press I to insert a keyframe. Now let's go to the 120 frame. What here I want is to give it a rotation on the Z again, but a 360 degree rotation. We can of course do that way faster, so let's just right click to cancel it, press the N key, and you can see it has applied keyframes on these all transform, location, rotation, and scales. Now what we want to change around is with this Z rotation. So click on this and enter 360 degree and enter. Make sure to press I on it to insert the keyframe. Now if you go back and try to play our animation, you can see this kind of result. With the effect turned on, it will look even better. But let's just fine tune it even further. So the first thing is, it's good, the animation is good, we can make it better. How we can make it better? So if we click on this drop down and instead of timeline, we go to the graph editor. Here we can see the graph animation, which shows us how fast or the slow. For example, at the start, the graph line is not very steep, it's just slow, so it will start very slow at the start, and when the line is going very steep, the animation will be faster. So what we want to do is adjust the animation for this particular line, which is the rotation on the Z. We can see all the channels from here if we click on this drop down, which gives us the object transformation, but we only want to work with the Z one. So if we select this line, it will highlight that particular transformation. So what I can do is click on this eye icon, click and hold and drag like that. Then you can just turn on the Z rotation. Now what you have to do is to make it better, you can select this point, which is the curve handle. So if we scale it, we can make changes to the animation like that. And we can do for the start point as well. And we'll scale it like that to make the curve look more like an S. And now if we look at it, you can see this kind of result. The more tighter it will be, the more different will be the result. So I will go for something like this. Now we can go back to the timeline and let's make it go down. Now we can enable our geometry nodes pack by clicking on this display icon. So at some frame, you can see the glow is way too much. So we can adjust that by going back to the compositor and reduce the strength of this glare. So we had a glare with the streaks and a glare with a bloom. Bloom is very powerful, so we can reduce it to somewhat like that. And that will look good at every frame. All these steps have fine-tuned our result 10 times. I know you don't have that much patience and you want to get this rendered in Blender as soon as possible. So let's see how we can do that. We have created a really nice animation for us. I know it's time you want this render result out, right? So let's learn how you can export this as a video. Okay, before we can start rendering anything, let's see something with an example. So if I go to render and click on render image, it will start rendering and you can see those number of samples appearing. And the sample numbers are very high. So we can adjust everything inside this render properties. Inside here, first we have already selected the render engine, which is cycles, giving us the most realistic result. Next, the sampling. That is very important. Now, for the viewport, max samples and noise threshold and everything is set here. If needed, you can click on denoise. So it will show you how your denoised result will look like without those grains. But if you prefer without the noise, you can just uncheck denoise from the samples, from the viewport and the render as well. Same can be done inside the compositor as well. So if just after this clear node, I can use a denoiser that will do the same work, only if needed. Now the samples are way too high, so you can set something very low to 256 and it will render a sample of 256 per frame. We can increase the noise threshold to 0.001. So if this value is lower, it will take more time to render, but it will reduce more noise from the render. Now next is we are going to look at the light path. So if we click on this max bounces, it shows us a total of 12 bounces. And then we have different diffuse, glossy, transmission, volume and transparent. What it means is the light will reflect this much time, then it will just disappear. So by default we have these values. If we don't have anything such as a transparent object is not there, you can set it to as low as 2 value. The diffuse means any solid looking object like our metal here. A glossy will be the glassy object. You can reduce this one as well to 2. Transmission, volume and etc. So adjust these max bounces depending upon the objects you have in the scene. Next, we have the fast GI approximation. If we check this, it will give you a faster result, but it will cost you the reduced quality. We will move to the performance section. Going inside here, we can see this persistent data. So every time Blender renders a frame, it calculates all that data and then renders that frame. If you don't want it to recalculate that same data every time, you can click this persistent data and then it will take less time using the previous data to render the next frame. That will improve our performance a lot. And that covers the render properties. Next, we can move towards the output properties, which is the most important part here. As we can see, the resolution can be set from here. We can increase this to a 2K, 4K resolution, whatever you would prefer. Next, we already know about the render region. Then we have the most important thing, which is frame rate. You can set the frame rate here, or you can change this to a custom one and set your frame rate as per your requirement. But we'll keep this to 24. If we look at the frame range, it shows us how much frames Blender will render. The same frame can be visible on the timeline. So if whatever value I change here works on here as well, and you can see this line moving as well. You can directly set it from here as well. So we want to render till 200 frames, so enter the value 200 and enter. After that, you just have to set the output folder. Click on this icon and you can select the output folder. And lastly, you have to select the file format. For example, mostly there are a lot of image format and only a video format. Why people prefer the image format? If we are rendering a video and something happens in between and Blender crashes, all that hours of render will go for nothing. But if we render an image, Blender will render each and every frame as an image. So even if it crashes in between, it can continue from the last rendered image. For example, you have started rendering from first frame and you have rendered to the 100th frame. After this, Blender crashed. Now, you restart it again and you have already rendered the 100th frame and you want Blender to continue rendering from 101 frame. But that will not happen. If this is checked, Blender will start working from the start, even if the frames are rendered. If we uncheck this, Blender will see if there are any existing frames and then continue from the next frame. And this is the most basic thing that you need to understand while you're rendering. Now, before we render, there's a little bit more of thing that you need to understand. So for example, I add a plane to the scene like this. Now, if I click on render and render image, it will render that plane as well in our scene. Even though I press H key to hide it and render image, it is still here. How do we fix that? This plane is visible in the outliner. With this icon, we can hide it and unhide it. Just on that right, there is a camera, which says it can disable it from renders and enable it. Once it is crossed, it will not show up in the render. So click render, render image, and it will not show up anymore. There are a lot of more icons that can be used but are not here right now. You can enable them from these filters, and then you can click on all these icons that whatever you would need. So there's another new icon which shows this cursor. If I click this, I will no longer be able to select this plane, whatever I do. That is really useful if I don't want to select the plane and select everything else and move them away. Your outliner looks very chaotic and you want to make it more cleaner. So what we can do is we have this collection inside this scene collection. I can rename them by pressing the F2 or just double clicking on them, and I will name this as lights. And then I can drag and select everything and drag and bring in inside these lights. So I'll put all the lights inside. Then we can create a new collection, right click, create a new connection, and I will rename this as objects. And I will put the background, the plane, and the start point inside this, and put the lights inside the lights. Inside our lights, we have the logo, so we can shift the logo to the objects as well. And this way, we can make it look more cleaner. Also, let's move the camera out to the scene collection. So it is out of these two collections and visible here. And now we can render our final result. To render the whole animation, go to render and click on render animation. It will render all those samples and give our output and result in a few seconds. As you can see, the frame number are increasing and it is rendering each and every frame as a single image. You can render this as a video as well, whatever would you prefer. And if you're rendering it as images, you can use a software which is called Shutter Encoder. It is available for free. Use that to combine all those images into a video. With this, we will end this masterclass right here. I hope you learned a lot of things about Blender and you are more comfortable than you were before when you didn't know anything. So go out, start blending, start creating more things, start learning more things, and do show me the result that you created from this tutorial. I would love to really see that. And if you really love this tutorial, please give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more awesome tutorials in the future, and do drop any comments below if you have any doubts. I'll help you out as soon as possible. With this, I will see you in the next one. Ta-ta!